Lloyd Brown, welcome to your show.
Steve on the road, Brown himself. What's going on?
Just on the move, making moves, Lloyd, just like you. I want to grow up and be just like you.
Well, there you go.
Why?
We're
Well,
gonna have to give you five. I'll have to donate 5 hairs so you can look like me.
those would be some very precious graphs you'd be sharing, right? All right. So why whales fail today? Our topic is name the failure mechanisms before those failure mechanisms name your well. Why is this important, Lloyd?
Well, it ultimately comes down to what is the disruption that is happening in your well. And the mechanisms of failure are due to a change, right? We put a fluid system in this rock to crack it, frack it, and create the ability for that precious resource to come into the wellbore. And but when we do that, we are disrupting equilibrium. And so when disruption happens, what are the consequences, or what are the chemical mechanical reactions of that disruption? And in our language, that's called a mechanism of failure. And so identifying the 5 types of mechanisms in an actual environment that replicates what's going on downhole, understanding those mechanisms where we have pressure, temperature, and then the function of time. We've got the mineral constituents of the geology and understand what those look like, and then what the fluid is that we're putting on it and how that impacts the type of mechanisms that are going to break down the geology, damage perm, and mitigate the ability of the oil being able to migrate into the wellbore and be produced.
So let's walk through those. What are the mechanisms of failure, and what does each one actually do downhole?
Well, one of them, and probably the easiest one to describe, is swelling, clay swelling. So, one thing we have in West Texas is we have playa lakes, and we have a lot of them. And if you go into a playa lake when it's dry, you got all these gigantic cracks, and a little bit of rain doesn't do anything to it, right? They don't hold any water. But boy, when you get a large rain and a large volume of water, those cracks go away. And that's from clay swelling, and they swell shut. And these ponds now hold water, and they hold water for a really long time until the clays unswell or they dehydrate and they collapse. Well, guess what? Downhole, they never evaporate downhole. Once they're wet, they're wet. And once they swell, they stay swollen. And you can't regain the permeability from those swellable clays. And so, as we've gone over time, there's different kinds of clays, different mineral structures of clays. And the 2 predominant ones are illite and smectite. Smectite is a more swellable type of clay, and illite is a clay that is a migratable clay. What happens is when the clay swell, the smectite swells, the illite's like, you ever had mica? You ever seen mica, the mineral mica? It looks like a mirror. Mm-hmm. And we've got a lot of mica in our riverbeds here in the Panhandle. And when they get dry, the mica shows up, and that is a material that comes off the clays. It's bound with the clays, and it ends up flowing like in a river. And it does this microscopically. And so we get this clay swells, but these other types of clays migrate. And we call those migratable fines. So that's a second mechanism of failure. And what they do is kind of I was in Houston over the weekend, and I was with a friend of mine, and his house, he lives in Bel Air inside the loop, and his house had to be raised 6 feet after the big flood, 7 or 8 years ago, when it maybe a little bit longer now. And one of the things that caused all that flooding was they had all these bridges on the bayous downstream, and all this material plugged up against these bridges, and all that water backed up into their house and had a capillary effect. Well, that's what happens in a well as these fines migrate towards the wellbore and they come to a place where they lose velocity and or a change in pressure. They stack up like the debris does in a river, or, here in Amarillo, we see a lot of debris go into our drains, right? When we get one of our big rains and you get all that material and it backs everything up. That's the second mechanism of failure that we have to understand so we can prevent.
So those are two. Then we have, what's the next one?
Well, the next one is the degradation of carbonate. And that is when the carbonate, if you think of a Tums is an antacid, right? And we drop it into our stomach, we eat it, and it neutralizes our acid. Well, the opposite reverse effect is happening. We take this fluid under pressure in this temperature and we put it on the Tums, and instead of stomach acid dissolving it, this fluid dissolves it. Has an acid type effect, and it releases CO2. You ever eat a Tums and you burp?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's CO2 coming off the Tums. Or, even a more violent example of it would be an Alka-Seltzer.
Yep.
And but both of those mechanisms, that's creating, again, this degradation of the geology. It enhances the migration of fines. It can enhance the swellability of clays. And so, again, that blocks our perm. It also then, for the fourth mechanism of failure, is it will attack pyrite. Pyrite is iron sulfide, and when it breaks down, it becomes H2S. And if you make iron sulfide, well, now we have ultimately our final mechanism of failure is emulsions, a microemulsion. And are you a ketchup, a mayonnaise, or a mustard kind of guy?
Mustard.
Well, one thing other than being a condiment, mustard, mayonnaise, and ketchup are all forms of an emulsion. They're materials, like a mustard is a mustard seed ground up, and it's emulsified with water and lectins and other type of materials. And so it makes a thick material.
Yep.
It's known as an emulsion. Mayonnaise is an emulsion. And so when you look at those, you don't want those emulsions because water and oil won't pass through them. They get stopped by them. And these emulsions, you can get them out of the well. And a lot of companies will see that happen, but it'll carry sand that they've spent a lot of money to try to put in place to hold the fractures open. And that sand will go into the wellbore. And now they're producing sand. They're drilling sand out and having to clean it up and clean it out so they can get the hydrocarbon out. Well, another thing that happens is you get the emulsions in your produced fluid, but the really bad actor is those emulsions start happening further and further back away from the wellbore as we start normalizing our pressures. And so all of those mechanisms, generally speaking, at least two, but most of the time, three of them are existing when we frack a well. And so, in a really severe case, we'll have all five. And so there's other more technical, more geochemical reactions that I could go into, but from a layman's term standpoint, that's what we're talking about today.
That's top 5. The I was thinking about the variables. There's a number of variables that when you combine all these situations together. Tell me again that number. I keep forgetting.
Well, so one thing that we work with in geology that we're always concerned is it's called a ternary diagram, and it measures clay, quartz, and carbonate. And the ratio of those 3 minerals in our geology are very indicative of what type of mechanisms of failure we're going to have. And there's almost always, all 3 of them exist. Usually 2 of them, like in our older, sandstone reservoirs that we produced from years and years ago, they were almost all quartz or silica, and they would have some clays within them. Every now and then a little bit of carbonate dispersed in them. Well, in the unconventional geology that we're working with, it has all 3. So if we've got 3 primary constituents and we've got 5 mechanisms, 3 to the 5th power is 242 different ratios of mechanisms that we measure. And, back in the day, most people don't know what a throttle is, right? Because on older cars, we'll have a throttle, which you could pull out with a handle, right?
Yeah.
And then you'd have the gas pedal, which would give you the acceleration. And many times you'd have a brake, right, that you could be pulling on it. Well, when we're looking at this, do we need to adjust the throttle? Do we need to push down the gas, or do we need to pull on the brakes? And which ratios of those 3 do we need to do in the driving environment that we're in? And so that's a little bit of a correlation of what we're doing when we're talking about these mechanisms. And then your well can be defined by what was the root cause if you're not getting the resource that you predicted out of it. And, in a couple of these newer or geologies that we're trying to take advantage of today, the Barnett Shale and the Permian being one of them, highly liquid rich, really, really good geology, but extremely volatile. It's got all 5 mechanisms. It's just it's temperamental. It's a beautiful geology, and it knows it's beautiful. And if you don't treat it right, it's not going to give you what you want. And so, but as we're learning, there's all of these different geologies need to have either the brake put to them, more gas, or they need to be throttled back.
That's excellent. You haven't explained it like that before in any of our conversations. And so that's where your patented Pathfinder process helps diagnose that well beforehand. And so that you can go in there with confidence and get the resources out that you planned for.
That's right. And that's why it's important to do the science, and it's important to understand the geology that's for that area based on, how it was deposited, and understanding the horizontal law of deposition as geologists, and then understanding how that has changed through regional lift, tilt and uplift. And it's really cool. It's you get to play Perry Mason every day when it comes to really understanding and maximizing this precious resource that we have, and the resources that are precious that we're using to go get this precious resource, right? So it's all about how do we create the highest multiple on invested capital, which is a term called MOIC. How do we make sure that we're doing um, both our investors and the assets that we're creating for them. How do we create the highest return from a multiple on invested capital?
Excellent. Now I have a bonus question. I've been meaning to ask you this, and so I was watching Landman, and those guys. One little episode, these guys are out hunting, and they come up on a well, and they run up, and then they all fall down. Was it H2S? Is that what they were breathing? That there was some gas that?
Yes. Yes, it's H2S, and that's one of the things about H2S. Not only is it corrosive to our wells, no, it causes scale, but it has an IDLH, which stands for immediately hazardous, immediate death. Golly, I can't remember the total for the acronym, but it's basically how much do you need to breathe to die? It's 100 parts per million.
Mm.
You know, when you turn on your spigot and your hot water heater hadn't run for a long time and you get that blast of rotten egg smell, that's probably less than a half a part per million of H2S in that. And so 100 parts per million is not a lot, but it will kill you. It renders your body and it causes a paralysis. So basically you suffocate. And your body shuts down its functions because it's like, hey, this is a toxin, it's a poison. H2S, if it's in a low lying area, it's heavier than air. So the most dangerous days are days that it's extremely calm, foggy, and if there's an H2S leak, it'll come out and be in a low area, and you can walk into it. And I saw that episode. It's one of the only ones I've seen this year. Don't plan to watch any others because it's like my buddies in Montana said, there you go. There's your Yellowstone. And, but yeah, it'll kill you. And unfortunately, I've known a gentleman when I was in high school that he was a swamper, and he was not wearing his personal protective gear, and walked into a big area of water, broke the surface tension on the water. The H2S came out of the water and dropped him dead immediately. His name was Danny. Really sad. So it's something that we do. It's a factual thing we deal with in the industry.
So the Pathfinder process helps abate that H2S being released, even, correct?
Right. We don't even, unless it's already naturally occurring, and there's some areas in the Permian that it's already been generated through the natural course of going into equilibrium, and it's been trapped underground. There's natural there, but most of what we generate either comes from the geology or can be bacterial induced. And there's bacteria that they're natural process of, they're called sulfate reducing bacteria. They eat sulfate and they make hydrogen sulfide gas as their excrement. And so those are ways. That's another mechanism, but it's not one it's caused by poor management at the surface versus coming from the geology.
And then that's extremely corrosive to the equipment as well.
Absolutely. It makes what's called iron sulfide. It reconstitutes itself, and the scale at the surface can be highly flammable itself. There's tank batteries that when they've opened them up and they've had a large amount of the sediment in the bottom, it auto ignites and burns. And so there's all kinds of bad stuff that's happening from these mechanisms of failure.
And so it just highlights to me how important it is to get this right instead of just go by your gut on what you're pouring down hold of to hopefully mitigate or hopefully make a good guess on how you're going to manage the health of this well.
Well, if you don't understand what the geology and what's happening down there, and I'm not throwing stones at folks because there's for a long time we were taught that you can't do anything about it. It's naturally occurring. What our discovery is no, it's not. And it's funny, you can have two different operators setting a fence line apart, one set of wells going north and one set going south, and one will have H2S and CO2 producing from the exact same geology while the other has none. The one that has none, guess what? It used our process.
Wow. Refined process.
And that's
Lloyd, I learned so much on these. You're starting to be a really good teacher here. You're blinding us with science.
I hope I'm actually doing the opposite. I hope I'm giving clarity through this process. And if I'm not, and we have anybody shoot us an email. And if there's something that's not clear, or you want to have a vigorous debate, or as we call it today, a discernment, let's discern this together, because guess what? We learn so much more through conversation.
That's right. So here's, we're going to show you a couple of ways here. If you want to reach out to Lloyd via email. Whoa, bring that music in. Turn that music down there, DJ.
Well, it's lloyd.brown@refinedcompletions.com. And then it can be at our website, refinedcompletions.com, and at Refine C Lloyd B, that wonderful, easy, roll off your tongue handle. But the most easy way is grab your phone, hit the QR code in the upper right-hand side, and give us a shout.
All right. Excellent. Why wells fail, Lloyd. So if you've been listening, you want to have a conversation, see what the refined process looks like in your world, in your future, better wells, reach out and start a conversation with Lloyd and team, and you'll be illuminated.
Awesome.
Why wells fail. All right, Lloyd, good job today. We're going to call this a wrap.
Love the mobile studio.
Yeah, me too. Let's do this every day.